All right, so I want to come at you and give you some of these Romanian deadlift tips that are going to make you better at Romanian deadlifting. They're going to make you better at hip hinging in general. They're going to make you better at activating your hamstrings and your glutes during hip hinge movements. So tip number one is focus on how you start each rep. The thing you want to do when you start each rep of a hip hinge movement is you literally want to imagine you're pushing your butt, your hip area, backwards in space. So if there was a wall, maybe like a foot behind you, you would want to try to push your hips as close to that wall as you can get them. So that's how you start each rep. You can't start the rep by pushing anything forward, especially the knees or the shoulders, because all that would do, if you were pushing your shoulders forward to start the rep, you'd essentially just be like bending over with zero hip hinge. If you push the knees forward, you're going to be doing more of a squat, and we don't want that either. You basically want your shoulders and your knees to not really move forward in space throughout the rep. They essentially your knees kind of just stay still, but your shoulders just move down towards the floor, straight down and straight back up. And that's what you really want to shoot for. Starting the motion by driving the hips backwards is how you can accomplish this. And to me, that's the first step for a perfect hip hinge movement like the Romanian deadlift that I'm doing here. All right, let me hit you with another tip for these Romanian deadlifts. Now, first tip, push the hips back to start the movement. Second tip, let's focus on the degree of knee bend that you need to classify this as a Romanian deadlift versus a stiff leg deadlift, which by the way, I never recommend, or a conventional deadlift, which by the way, I heavily recommend. So the thing with Romanian deadlifts is you're allowed to have knee bend. It's not a straight leg deadlift. You can still get heavy hamstring activation and keep your back real nice and straight, real arched, real flat, and have some knee bend. Actually, you want a little bit of knee bend. So if you're watching my reps right now, what you're seeing is some knee bend, but you're seeing less knee bend than a conventional deadlift and a little more than a straight-legged or stiff-legged deadlift. And that's important. The real big thing about allowing yourself some knee bend is that it really allows you to keep your back that much straighter, particularly your lower back. It's easier to keep your lower back straighter if your hamstrings aren't stretched to their max. And if your legs are straight, you're really going to stretch those hamstrings to their max, but you're also going to really find that your lower back is rounding more. This would be the case in a stiff leg deadlift. I would argue that a stiff leg deadlift, yes, it's about hamstrings. Yes, there's some glutes involved, but you really get a lot of lower back rounding and spinal erector contracting. So you're actually working the lower back as well. I would classify it as a partial lower back activating exercise, where the Romanian deadlift and conventional deadlift, you're seeing a static contraction of those spinal erectors. You're keeping your lower back locked into an arched or a flat position, keeping your spine nice and safe, as your hips, your glutes, your hamstrings actually pull your upper body up into the straight up and down position or the standing position. So allow yourself a little bit of knee bend. Don't make your knees bend so much that you lose hamstring stretch at the bottom of each rep, but also don't keep them as straight as a stiff leg deadlift. All right, let me hit you with one more tip. Tip number 3, if you're still with me, this one's really gonna help you out. It's gonna make you maximize your Romanian deadlifts. It's gonna make you maximize that glute and hamstring activation during each rep. So I've talked about how to lower the weight, shoot the hips back. I've talked about the ideal degree of knee bend, not too much, not straight-legged. Now let's talk about getting off the ground. So you lower the weight, you get it to the ground, and then of course you gotta lift it back up. Now instinctually, especially as a beginner or an outsider looking in, someone might say, well, they're using their back to lift that weight up, obviously. You're really not using your back. You shouldn't feel a lower back pump when you're done with Romanian deadlifts. What you should feel a pump in is your glutes and then your hamstrings as well. Because what we're doing here, we're hip hinging. So your hamstrings are acting like a pulley those pulleys are flexing, they're shortening on the lift portion, the positive portion of each rep, and it's pulling your upper body into the upright standing position. As that is happening, your glutes also fire forward. They squeeze, they flex, they push your hips forward, And when your hips push forward from the bottom position, your upper body shoots up into that straight up and down position. If your upper body is like this and your hips push it forward, it pushes up like this. That's kind of tricky to do. Like this, and then back down. That is how your glutes work during the Romanian deadlift, and that's why it's a glute exercise. The hamstrings, they really activate at the bottom half of the positive portion of each lift. But the glutes, once you're about halfway up, I recommend 100% shifting your mind-muscle connection to your glutes, driving them forward and letting them shoot your hips forward and your body to the upright position. And you can see, if you do those things and you think about those muscle groups, you're actually not thinking about your back. Your back is statically flexed. Just lock it in position. Focus on the hamstrings and the glutes. And guys, these 3 tips, I promise you they're gonna maximize the benefits and the mind-muscle connection, the proper muscle activation of your Romanian deadlifts every time you do them in the gym.